Good morning, everybody. Today we are going to cover the topic of designing forms and reports. This is part of actually design workflow activity, and really we want to understand what are the user interfaces with computers. So basically, how do you interact with computers? You know that you are using keyboard, you are using mouse, and also you are using graphics on the computer screen like buttons, text boxes, and also view reports, for example. We will cover those as well. So when you enter data into a computer system or an information system, we usually use forms. Forms are labels and text boxes that we enter data. Also, we are using reports to read information from screens, for example. So today we will cover the forms and reports mainly as two ways of interfacing with computers. So if I go through the system development lifecycle diagram, as you can see, we have planning, analysis, design, implementation, and maintenance, of course. Sorry. In the design phase, as we talked last week and the week prior to that, we are concerned with how to make the system. So in the analysis, we actually find out what the system should be, what are the requirements for that for that system. In the design phase, we decide how to make the system. And of course, one of the main activities of design phase is to create forms and reports. Basically, how do you want to enter data via computer when you're actually using your new system? How do you want to enter data? And for that, we use forms. And also, you may be wanting to specify how to actually get data from your system. That's called reports. So basically, you read reports from your system. And of course, also we'll cover the dialogues and interfaces. So sometimes you are using several sequences of forms and reports to interact with your computer. For example, you register for a course. Maybe in the first page of the form you should select your course, your credits, so on and so forth. Second page, then you click next, you go to the second page, and on the second page you will have, for example, other details, for example, which professor you want to choose, and so on and so forth, the time, so on and so forth. So basically you are interacting and in a way dialoguing with your computer. So we will cover that as well, and we will cover some other specifications about interfaces. So what is the definition of design? Many might think that, okay, design is actually creating the actual system, but actually this is not the case. Design is whatever we do just before we create the actual system. So we draw a plan, we draw a blueprint, we create models, we create, in this case, for example, for forms and reports, we create mock-up screens, which are basically drawings of what the forms and reports they should look like, but not actually a functional forms and reports, just what they should look like. So it's the appearance of it. So make sure that actually you make a distinction between design and implementation. So design is still at the it's a phase that we are still preparing for implementation. We create the last diagrams, we add more specifications to our diagrams. Also, in the context of forms and reports, we create the mock-up screens to show how forms and reports, for example, on a web page, they should look like, what kind of color they should have, what kind of font we should use, where the buttons should be, where the text boxes should be, so on and so forth. Now, so what are the tools that we have for creating forms and reports? We have, of course, you can always use a pen and paper to create your forms. So you just take a paper and you draw a few boxes and you decide where the first name should go, last name should go, so on and so forth. But also we have other tools. We have case tools for creating mock-up screens or forms and reports. One of the tools that you might want to use is, of course, Visual Studio, which is a Microsoft product. It's free. I have given you the instructions for installing this product. Of course, you may want to install the latest version. This is the version 2015. The latest version is called Community, so it's Visual Studio Community version. If you Google it, very simply you can download and install it. So using this tool, actually you can create some forms. So let me quickly, I show you how. So I'm going to start my Visual Studio. So Visual Studio 2017. is a great development environment. So what we can do to start, you need to start a new project. So go to File, let's see if I can, I still is working on it. Okay, so go to File, New, Project. For example, imagine you want to create a new a web application. So I choose ASP web application. I choose Visual C#, and maybe I choose just a name for the project. I say, for example, forms and reports. It's better not to put any space. Then I browse to a folder. For example, this is for DMA601. I create a new folder for this example. It says forms and reports. Okay, so we select that folder. The solution name is also forms and reports. I create a directory for the solution. We say, okay, you can create the directory. Then you click OK. On the next page, it's asking us what kind of framework do you want to use, or what kind of web application do you want to use. You have, of course, an empty web application, web form, or MVC, and so on. So we use web form. Web forms are the easiest. So basically, it allows you to have a form, and you can put gadgets, boxes, text boxes, and others on this form. So I choose web form and I click OK. Takes a bit of time, of course. So it creates the skeleton of a ASP.NET web application. The type of application is web form. And of course, I will try to create a mock-up screen using this tool. While this is working on it, okay, this is fast. Okay, it's too long. The full recorder. Okay, never mind. I just now of course, you can use other tools to create your mock-up screens or your screens for forms and reports. You can use Microsoft Visio. That's a good tool, or any other tool. Even you can use PowerPoint to create forms that I'll show you shortly. So let's create a new web page, and on that new web page I put some gadgets. So imagine I want to design a web page. So I say, I right click on the project, I say add a new item. So this new item, I want it to be a web form, but not just a simple web form. I call it form, for example, just form. Add so what it gives us, the development environment gives us a panel to work with. If I go to design, if I click on design, here you see that we have an empty page to work with. If I click on source, is the source page for that page. So source page is basically HTML, as you can see here. Hypertext markup language is a language that is used for creating web pages. So there's nothing there at the moment. If I go to design, now I can actually use the toolbox. Here is the toolbox on the left. I can use this toolbox to create my form. For example, imagine we want to create a form for entering the data about a school. So basically we need to have, of course, school name, school address, number of students in that school, and the school contact, basically somebody that we can talk to or we can contact. So first I make some more space here by just clicking enter. Already you can, of course, type. So I say this is a school school form or school data entry form. So that's the title of the web page. Then I would like to put some box. So I say school name. School name is a label for a text box. A text box allows me to enter text for school name. So I go down and I choose text box, drag and drop it here. So I have a text box here. Second line, maybe I just make some more line. Let's say address. Now address, of course, let me see. Address is street, and I put the text box in front of it. Then after street is city. Let me align it. Choose the space, you can align them. and state, put another text box, postcode or zip code, another text box. So imagine right now that you want to force the users to use only the state codes or states that you are specifying. Text box allows the users to enter free text. But if you want your users to select from a number of or a valid list of states, then instead of text box, we use drop down list. So if I go here, I've got drop down list. So drop down list I put in front of the state. So let's see what we have. Let me make some space between each of them. Now, so let's see if imagine that that's all we need. Then on your form, you can enter the data for school name in this text box, street, city, state, and zip code. Then you need, of course, a button to send the data to the database. So we use a button gadget for that. And now if you right click on the button and select properties, on the right side you see the properties of the button that you can change actually. So instead of button, I call it submit. If I click on the screen here, then you will see that it has changed to submit. I will need another button, cancel. Usually on web pages we have a button that submit, but also a button that allows you to cancel. Now don't forget, these are there is no functionality associated with these buttons or text boxes. They are just what we call mock-ups. Now maybe you want to add some you want to align your text boxes and so on and so forth. Of course you can do that. So let me run this and see what it looks like, what we have already. So if I the name of my form was forms and reports, so I go to forms and reports page. I think it's in content maybe. No. No, it's only forms. So forms.sv. Okay, so that's my actual page. If I right click on it and if I say view in browser, basically it runs the program and it opens the browser, and you will see the web page in a browser. Because it's a web application, therefore we see our application in a browser. The definition of web application is that you can access it and work with it using a browser. A browser like Internet Explorer, Safari, or Firefox, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is how the form looks like. You can add data, for example, IGU, I don't know, 8223. Lisberg Park, City Vienna, and then state. Of course, we haven't got any state to choose from. and zip code. For example, I don't know, it's maybe 22200, for example. Now, don't forget that this actually is not doing anything right now. If I click on submit or cancel, it doesn't do anything because this is just a mock-up. Basically, we decide in design phase what it should look like. Of course, this will include the color, the font, the background color, so on and so forth. So let's see how can we actually populate. Let me go there. How can we populate a drop-down list? So state is a drop-down list. You can populate this, of course, in two ways, programmatically, or you can choose the items in the properties of that object. So if I click here, I can add, for example, I can add here, I can add, for example, Maryland. Add another one, Virginia. Washington, D.C., for example. District of Columbia. And okay, so I think that's enough. Now, if I run the program again, view in browser, now I have state is populated with the 3 items that I chose. So you can create the mock-up screens. Now using the, of course, this toolbox. As you can see, the toolbox has different gadgets. We have button is mostly used if you want to have a calendar. You can drag and drop a calendar, for example, here. And when you run that, of course, the calendar should show. Let me see. So your calendar is here, and it should be functional. So as you can see, the calendar works on. So of course, as I mentioned, this is only mock-up screen. We have checkbox. Checkbox is another popular gadget. We have checklist, which is a bunch of checkboxes. Drop-down list is used a lot to select one among many options. We can embed image, can have a button with, with an image. Label also we can use to label, for example, text boxes. So let me, for example, I put a label here, okay, and this label, the properties are on the right. So label, I say, for example, street. Oh no, let's see. For this label, I put maybe street and then apartment number. Apartment number, just in case we have an apartment, for example. So a label allows you, of course, to enter text visually, and you can choose background color. So instead of simply entering some text that like we did, you can actually decide on background color. Oh, let me see, I think I chose it. Appearance, background color. Expect it to background color to change. Let's see. Oh, background color is here because that's border color. So background color, let's do that. And as you can see here, I have apartment, and I can put a text box to enter the apartment number, for example. So that becomes our mockup screen. If you want to show it, of course, you should run the program. That is one way of creating a form. Let me view in browser. So basically that becomes our mock-up screen. A non-functional appearance of the web page, how it should look like. Now, so this was one way of creating forms and reports. Of course, you can design that. Also, we can use simply PowerPoint to do that. For example, let me. I suggest that, of course, you try to find a tool that is specialized for creating mock-up screens. PowerPoint is, you can use that, of course, but it's not really specialized for that purpose. So I say, okay. For example, I want to create a button. I might use that one and submit. So that's my button, for example. I can even go to effects, shape outlines, or shape effects, and I can make this kind of appearance for my button. For example, for the text box, also I can create, I can say, okay, that's my text box. And then I go there and I say no fill, so that's just text. For my text, I can just simply choose text and I say, okay, that's, for example, school name. So this is another way of creating mock-up screens. That should work too, whatever is more you feel more comfortable, but I recommend that you use a specialized tool like Visio or Visual Studio. So for example, that becomes school contact. And that's it. So that becomes your mock-up screen. For your funnel, when you want to create mock-up screen, you have options to do that. And of course, you need to use the guidelines that we learned today to do that. So what is a form? In old days, of course, before computers, we had paper forms that you had to fill the empty places and you had to give information. And these days, of course, forms are usually in web pages form, and they are used to collect information from users of the system. For example, student, course registration, so on and so forth. Now, reports are also a business document. They are predefined usually, so we know what kind of data we are expecting, and it's only for reading data. So forms, you enter data, reports, you read data. Now, let me, if I go to google.com, let's go to google.com. So this is a very simple form because you can enter data and you can search. You click here and you search. So let me enter some data. For example, data modeling. Data modeling, and then I click on Google search. Google search returns a report. So this is a report, what you see in front of you. The previous page was a form. You could enter data. Of course, Google has given us the possibility of entering data also as at the same time that it gives you a report or an output for your query. So in this case, we have the report is data modeling Wikipedia, what is data modeling, so on and so forth. As we can see, the report, we expect there is a predefined format. We can expect this format for Google, for example. And then at the bottom, you have navigation. So basically, you know where you are. I'm on page 1. If I click there, then I know I'm on page 2. This is a very good design because at any point in time you know where you are not lost. There's not too much information that you don't know what's happening. Google is using the right font color and the right font size, so it's easy to read and easy to navigate. Let's go back. Now let me go back. So how do we know what kind of forms or what kind of reports an application or an information system requires? We find out about forms and reports by looking at the use case diagrams. If you remember, use case diagrams specify the interaction of a user with the system. So the user can be, of course, another program, or it can be a human. And here we are assuming that it's human. So that is one way. Of course, another way is to look at the data flow diagrams. If you remember, in data flow diagrams, we have data flowing in to the system or data flowing out of the system. When the data flows in, we need a form because we need to enter data. When the data flows out, we need a report because the data is being viewed by somebody outside the system. And of course, by reading the requirements, by reading the activity diagrams also, and use case descriptions. So that's how we find out actually how many forms we need, how many reports do we need, and basically the details on what kind of details do we need on the form and what kind of details do we need on the report. So if I want to map if I want to map, for example, a data flow diagram, I have a data flow diagram here. If you remember, this is the food ordering system, and this food ordering system was taking order from customer, was sending it to the kitchen, was saving some data into the database, and was giving some reports to managers. So here, when the customer enters data, that is a form. When the kitchen reads the data, that kitchen is a report. And also here we have management, that they read the report. So we have 2 reports and 1 entry. And of course, when we acknowledge the customer's order, we give a receipt. That also is a report to customer. So this is one way of finding out the kind and number of reports and forms we need for an information system. It's just by looking at the data flow diagram. So what are the common types of forms and reports? We have, as you know yourself, we have, for example, course registration form that is given by universities for you to enter data and select courses. We have employment application forms. We have product order forms. You go on Amazon, for example, to order for a book. Of course, on Amazon, you usually don't type anything, but you nevertheless, you select, you click on links, and then you submit. Of course, we have government forms, maybe W2 form, W4 form. These are the common types of forms. So what are the common types of reports? We have, in terms of timing, we have, for example, reports that they are scheduled to be sent every morning, for example, maybe about the, I don't know, the market values of certain stocks, for example. We have also key indicator reports that actually they create a summary of very important information to executives on a regular basis, maybe daily, weekly, monthly. We have exception reports. These exception reports are reports that, so imagine a system is running and suddenly something goes wrong. The admin of the system must be informed, and an email is sent with a report saying, okay, there's a problem. We have drill down reports. Drill down reports are, you are able to actually drill down. So you have a map of, for example, USA. You click on certain state, then you go and you are able to see more details about the, for example, the street maps, like Google map that you have. So that's called drill down report. You have, of course, unplanned reports. For example, you are in a company, suddenly they need a certain report. So they ask you, okay, can you create this report based on this requirement? These are called ad hoc reports. So what are the elements that we need to consider when we design a form or a report? First of all, you need to know who is going to be the user of the form and report or report. Is it going to be an executive, a management, or a department operator? So you need to know that, because for each of these different people, you need to follow different guidelines. Also, you need to know what is the purpose of the report or form. Why do you need this report? And you need to also know when this form or report is needed, the timing of it, the frequency of it. Also, you need to know, okay, where this form or report should be delivered. For example, if you're creating a web application, very likely you want the web page to be where you deliver your form or report. Or form or report is seen by your users via a web page. Also, you have to consider, okay, how many people are using this form or report, so that you can again use the guidelines to have a better reports. Sometimes you don't have enough requirements to create form and report. Prototyping is the best approach in this case. So you create something, you give it to your customers or users, they look at it and they add few things, then they send it back to you, say, okay, can you do these changes? You change the report according to what they have asked. You send it back to them, and they revise the form, and then they say, okay, can you add this one? So after several back and forth, you have something that looks maybe most like the form that they are requiring, or the report that you are requiring. So that is called basically prototyping. So this is a very simple form for a school, for example. I created this using Microsoft Visual Studio. So it has a title, it has some labels, school name, address, these are called labels. In front of school name, these are called text boxes or text box. In front of region, that is called drop-down list. Save, cancel, and help, they are called buttons. So basically, buttons, they do something for us. Drop-down list, they allow you to select one of many options. Text boxes, usually they allow you to enter free text. Of course, usually there's a limitation on text boxes and on the length of the text, or in other words, how many characters we can enter into the text box. So in design phase, what are the deliverables when you are actually creating forms and reports, mockups and specifications? So basically, what do you do? What kind of documents do you produce? Basically, the design specifications for forms and reports are what you will deliver. Now, how does it look like? First of all, you have a narrative overview, which means really just a summary of what the form is about, who are the users of the form, what kind of task this form is achieving for us, and also what are the environment factors. For example, I don't know, maybe the forms are used in an international environment with different languages or different time zones. So, for example, we can say for the school form that you just saw, we can say, okay, the form name is school information input. Users of the form are going to be school contacts throughout the world. What is the job of this form is to input data on school name, address, city, country, region, and of course, validating data entries. Validating data entry is very important because you don't want to save data that is not valid in the database. So prior to sending data into the database, you need to validate that your data is correct. Environment is basically where your forms are going to be used. For example, if your forms are going to be used in US as well as in Singapore, then you need to consider probably having multiple languages for that form. Or you need to consider the time zone difference as well. Now, you have, of course, do you want your form to be a web page to be accessible from internet? Probably this is the most popular way of seeing reports, or sending data or inputting data into an information system. And usually, of course, you create a sample of the screen print that we call screen mockup. And also, if you have any report on testing and usability assessment, for example, if you have tested the report, or if you have had feedback, or in other words, you can also specify what kind of procedures you want to use to do testing and usability assessment of the forms. So what are the guidelines? So these are general guidelines. So first of all, if you are creating a form or a report, or designing a form and a report, use meaningful titles. Don't use, for example, acronyms. Use full words. Put some date and revision somewhere so that we know which version of the form you are using or which version of the report you are using, because almost surely you will have different versions of the same form. And it is good to have the current date shown on the form, and of course, so basically, if you can add those on a form to give it more, to give a form more, let's say, coordinates, so that a user will know more about your form. So if you give a date, if you give some especially current date, and also if you give the version, and maybe you have, let me show you an example. If you go to the bottom of many websites you will see there is a copyright. Let me see if Google has. Yeah, Google has, for example. No, that's right. Let me go to, for example, Amazon.com. Amazon.com. So that's their web page. Right? That's their web page. Usually they have some specifications here. For example, conditional use and so forth. 1996 to 2019, Amazon. So there is a date here that specifies. This is, for example, I don't know. We know that this form is has been created in 2019. Here you can choose language. Let me. I hope this is Spanish or so. You see that form has been created for multiple languages and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's go back to the slide. Also have meaningful information. Just show the information that really needs to be shown. You don't need to use any information that is not necessary. And also you need to create a good design. So you should make the navigation easy. So when a user is on your web page, he or she should not get lost where she is. For example, at the bottom of the Google web page, you see if you search for some keywords, you will see that is page 1, page 2, page 3. So basically, you know where you are, and that page is highlighted. Of course, you can highlight information on a web page, but you should be careful not to use too much highlights, not to use too much colors, so that it is pleasant to the eyes of the users of the system. And also text, of course, on the forms. Usually the text should be left justified, which means should be aligned to the left. Numbers should be right justified, which means really it should go to the right. And you should have double spacing usually. And of course, don't hyphenate words between lines. So in old days, when you were reading a book, a word that was too long, they were cutting it into 2 pieces and they were putting a hyphen between them. So don't use hyphens if the word is too long. Because usually web pages, they automatically adjust the width or they put the complete word on the next line. So what are the general guidelines for displaying tables and lists on forms and reports? Again, use meaningful labels. That's very important. Use as simple language as possible so that for users. Of course, you should know your users. If you are creating a form or report for an executive, you should use probably different language that if you are using a form or report for school children or for school. So you need to adapt your language accordingly, but on the whole, use meaningful labels. And of course, if you are showing a list in a report, the best is to sort the list, so which means according to some numeric value, for example, 1 to 10, or according to list them alphabetically, so A, B, C, D, and so on and so forth. Of course, put enough space between the columns. And usually when you use fonts, don't use too many different fonts. For example, for emphasis, use one kind of font. For other normal non-emphasis emphasized text, just use normal text. And don't use very fancy fonts, the fonts that are that they look nice. You need to consider the readability of the font by different users. So what is the assessing usability? Basically, assessing the usability of a form or report is to test, to actually measure, first of all, to send the forms and reports to group of users, and then measure their usage, measure the success of the usage, their usage of your forms and reports. So maybe usually there are different criteria for the success of a form or a report. For example, time to learn. How long does it take for a user to learn using that form? Usually, it shouldn't take that long. Working with a form or a report should be very easy. Also, it is important to consider when you want to assess the success of your form or report, the speed of performance, the rate of error, the retention over time, so which means how much they can remember your forms and reports if they use it several times, and also the satisfaction of each customer in terms of so what they see and how they feel, the look and feel of the form. How can you get the information for assessing usability of your form? Usually you can observe your users, how they are using your forms and reports, if they are smiling using it or if they are frowning, if it is hard for them. Also, you can interview them and ask them, or there are other more sophisticated techniques, of course, for very large systems. So what are the general guidelines for usability of forms and reports? First of all, is consistency. Be consistent in forms and reports. Well, what it means to be consistent is that have the same background, have the same overall features of your form in the same place. For example, if you divide your form into two sections with backgrounds, with a certain background, use the same outline for all the forms or for all the reports. Also, if you are using terminology, be consistent. If you are using abbreviations, titles, and navigation, so on and so forth. For example, on Google, when you go on the Google web page, Google web page has a lot of consistency. You know how it looks like. It doesn't surprise you all the time because you know where to find your data, and the colors are consistent, the format is consistent. Also, you need to be efficient. Put your text and data aligned with the gadgets, with the text boxes, so on and so forth, for efficient navigation and data entry. You make sure that your text boxes and labels close to them are aligned well, or are readable very well, and you can actually find out which label corresponds to which text box easily. Now, sometimes also, if it is not necessary to enter a data, you shouldn't ask users to enter that data. For example, if you have their date of birth in one text box, you're asking them to enter the date of birth in one text box and then their age in another text box. Maybe you don't need to do that. Just ask their date of birth and then calculate their age according to their date of birth. Also, it should be easy and self-explanatory, and the users should not do a lot of effort to use your form. And of course, it it should be again consistent between the forms. So you have different forms. You shouldn't use certain fonts in one form and certain another fonts on another one. And basically your forms should be, when you design your forms and reports, you should consider the convenience of your users. It should be most convenient for your users, most easy for your users. One of the secrets of Google success is that Google has only one text box and everybody knows how to use it. It's very, very simple user interface. So as I mentioned, we have interface and dialogue. So interface is usually focusing on how the information is provided and captured from users. For example, we have text boxes and so on and so forth. Dialogue actually focuses on sequences of interface displays. For example, you have, as I mentioned, for example, you go and register for a course, you need to go through several screens to be able to do that. And that actually is what you can use activity diagrams to help you creating dialogue and sequencing actually the forms and reports. Now, as I mentioned, we can use the use case diagrams for finding out how many forms do we need and what kind of forms do we need. Here, for example, we have this use case diagram. We have a student, actor, registration clerk, and instructor. So students register for a course. So obviously you need to create a form for student to register. Instructor register for special classes. Then you need, of course, to create another form for instructor. Then, of course, registration clerk also plays a role in the registration. So a registration clerk probably needs a form, maybe to click or approve registration, and also maybe a registration clerk will need a form to read how many students are registered for or for which class. Also, we can use activity diagrams. For example, this is an ordering system activity diagram. So the order is received. Then, then we check the availability of our inventory. If the item exists, then you send the order and you send the order invoice, and that's over. If it is not in our inventory, then you do a back order, and then of course you pull the back order inventory, and then afterwards you send the invoice. So this also can guide you in how many forms do we need, how many reports do we need, what are the sequences of forms and reports. So what are the different methods of interacting with computers? Obviously, you can use command lines interaction. For example, if I go to CMD, and if I type, for example, IP config, I'm actually asking a question from the computer. I say, can you give me the internet configuration information? And it's giving me an answer. It says it's wireless LAN adapter, so on and so forth, and with some other details. So that is one way of, or I can say dir, which is list the directory. So that is called command line interaction. You have also menu interactions. So this is menu file. If I go to file, that's menu. If I go to insert, for example, Of course, yeah, these are now different, but in older days you had menu and you could select from a menu. So these are basically menu based. You have drop downs, of course. Here, for example, I have a drop down. I can select, for example, different font size. You might have form interactions, like you enter data in Google, or object-based interactions, or natural language interactions. Natural language, for example, I can talk to my computer. I say, hello, for example. I don't know if that works. I don't know if it, Siri, can you talk to me? Talk to, oh, it's Cortana.
I can learn to understand you much better if I can get familiar with the way you talk. I need your permission to help. I can learn to understand you much better if I can get...
Okay, so as you saw, I use natural language to interact with my computer. And finally, this is an activity for you, of course. Let me... So usually in the class we do this activity. Please try to do the same. And then in the next class, week 9, when I come to the class, we can discuss this activity. So to create forms and reports for this data flow diagram. That's also basically look at the diagram, see the data flow, and see how many forms and how many reports we need, and also try to create try to create the details of each form, what kind of labels they should have, what kind of boxes they should have, and on the report also the format, tabular format, and try to work on that. Okay, so let me see. Okay, of course I have as part of my Python instructions, you can go through this Python code. This is the code that I showed you also on week 7 about how we create a form using Python. Also, I showed you how to use how to create a form using okay, so that's it, using the Visual Studio. So please go through all the course material and try to do the activity. We had a very good presentation, of course, also on forms and reports by Manisha. So on reports, it was actually by on reports. So okay, everybody have a nice week and weekend. I'll see you on week 9.